I think we're just going to have to accept that Red Bull is choosing hard mode in regards to retaining this year's title. And no, I'm not talking about taking a risk with another driver and replacing Checo because, well, they're choosing to keep him. Now, this is nothing against Checo personally. He's doing what he can with the machinery he has, but let's just say that this decision is going to be heading toward the lap of Toto and Zach Brown. And not to mention, the numbers speak for themselves. Sergio Perez has managed to retain his seat for the rest of the season, but the cloud over his place at Red Bull has not dissipated at all. If Christian and Checo hope this act of solidarity, and as Horner likes to say ad nauseum, stability and continuity would dispel any talk of him being replaced, well, they're frankly wrong. At Spa, the writing was on the wall. Checo had a front row start. For a while, it looked like he was being able to hold back Piastri for third, but then that fell away, and he ultimately ended up 8th on the road, but then was promoted to 7th due to George's disqualification, which staved off the very real danger of him being 8th in the driver's standings, which would have been even worse for him. And when you want to look at the mathematics, the maths are simply not mathing when it comes to comparing him to last year's performance, which was derided considerably online. Last year, when we reached round 14 of the championship, Checo had scored 60.2% of the points that Max had scored. That's not terrible when you look back at it now, objectively. But back then, Helmut Marko led the online world into a frenzy of vitriol, hate, criticism, calls for him to be dropped. It sent Checo towards getting therapy. It was overblown in my opinion, and it was my opinion back then that he should have seen out his contract through to 2024. He also had 2 wins under his belt by round 14, and I recall being conflicted with Checo's position, but I certainly wanted him to do the deed. He wasn't affecting the constructors for Red Bull, and he wasn't damaging Verstappen's mission to defend the title, so yeah, it was looking okay, but not fantastic. But fast forward to now though, it's a different story. We've just finished round 14, this time at Spa, right before the summer break. Although, quite frankly, it doesn't feel like there's a summer break, what with the news that went down on Monday, am I right? That was absolutely bonkers. Sergio has not scored 3/5 of the points Max has like last year. He hasn't even scored half of the points. He has scored 47.2% of his teammates' tally, with no wins and 4 podiums all at the beginning of the year, which is half of the amount he secured throughout 2023. And that's not all. His average finishing position in a Grand Prix last year, not counting sprints by round 14, rounded down, was 4th place. This year, excluding the retirements in Monaco and Canada and sprints as well, it's 6th place. This is basically 4 points being sacrificed in terms of his woeful performances, not getting out of Q1, and over the course of an entire season, being 4 points off where you were last year is akin to 96 points being left on the table in terms of performance and ultimate race position. Put simply, if Red Bull lose the constructors by under 100 points, that's the points that Checo lost in terms of his average race position when compared to 2023. So if it's more than 100 points, then Checo isn't fully to blame. And that's the race position average. According to pitwall.app, for this year after 14 rounds, it's 8.52 in terms of his qualifying performance, rounded up to 9th place. And last year in total, for the entire year, it was 8.29, or rounded down to being 8th on the grid on average. Like I mentioned, last year it wasn't that much of a big deal because the RB19 was just that good. And even though Checo wasn't as effective as Max in cutting through the order if he was starting out of position, he was still able to do it somewhat by getting 4ths and 5ths instead of now 7ths and 8ths. They were going to win the Constructors and the Drivers' title anyway, so Red Bull could easily swat away any criticism about Sergio Perez and go, hey, he's got a contract, it's fine, it's all good, we believe in the guy. Yeah, it's all good. But now it's a different story. The RB20 is not as competitive as it was at the start of the season, and Verstappen isn't as capable of swanning off into the distance if he has the chance to, unable to repeat at Spa for a 3rd year in a row, a lower than usual grid start to go on to win. Max is fully aware of what the challenges are at Red Bull, and even though Christian Horner is backing the likes of Checo for the time being, there is mainly a focus on Max Verstappen to ensure that he has the best machinery possible in order to be able to get a big enough gap to win this year's world title with plenty of races to spare. Right now, it's looking okay. Nearly 80 points ahead of Lando Norris, he has that comfortable cushion back at the beginning of the year. Like I mentioned, it's like Brawn 2009. They start off with the best car, it then doesn't become the best car over the year, but all of the work at the beginning of that season was enough to give Max somewhat of a cushion and a bit of a safety net. And even though Christian Horner has made his mind up regarding Sergio, and it seems like the subject is closed, Checo doesn't want to talk about it, he's not going to be answering any questions about it, I reckon that the deciding factor factor in keeping Sergio Perez, aside from, what comes attached to Checo in his native market, is of course Max Verstappen himself. It's kind of like how Hamilton was Bottas's biggest defender when the Finn had to deal with a rolling one-year contract, and his championship teammate would insist that he be kept on since he was acting like a good wingman. A fact which is not lost on Valtteri to this day. In fact, he can actually joke about it now in press conferences, which is nice, that there's been enough distance from 2021, so that means he can have a little bit of a giggle about it instead of just going, "This is my life." This quote from Sportskeeda is quite the telling one and really helps me out in proving my point, and it was probably on the mind of the Red Bull Supremos during their post-Belgian GP meeting. This quote reading thus: "Ahem. I think our main concern is the car," says Max Verstappen. "That's what we should focus on mainly. Because I think if you look at Checo's weekend, it was very positive, I would say. Of course, in the race, it just shows that we have difficulties with the tyres. I think still the tyre life. So I think that should be our main priority." Considering that Red Bull is facing relentless speculation about Max's future with them, even though he's contracted to them for another 4 years, it's not lost on them. In the Dutchman's mind, if they've got a problem, change their flipping car. It's a perfectly valid point. There are some major issues with the RB20 that not even a change in power unit can help fix. Yes, it might have been enough to help keep Lando Norris behind him and just eke out that championship lead even more, but it's certainly not enough to allow Max Verstappen to go past Charles, Oscar, the two Mercedes, to get that win. And that's exactly what he needs. He needs that safety net. And now Red Bull are looking realistically at maybe not winning any more races this year. I know it's absolutely unheard of. I don't personally think that'll happen. They will win again this year. But even so, it's been the longest streak without Max winning since 2020. It's bonkers. The main focus in recent days has been the meeting that Red Bull will be having the following day after Spa to discuss what to do going into the second half of the year. And in a rather short statement, Horner boils down all the chatter about his driver's future into a couple of sentences, which basically reads that Checo isn't going anywhere, that he'll be back in one of their cars after the summer break, and that Horner hopes to see him do well at tracks where he has a history of performing well. This isn't the Red Bull that we're used to. Where's the cutthroat driver changes that we saw with the likes of Kvyat, Gasly, Albon? They made the call to get rid of them when they weren't performing well enough, and Checo has arguably done even worse and been kept even longer. This is just not right. It's weird to Red Bull fans why it's been completely, softly. Well, it's not exactly that hard to understand, but I'll get to that. All these two sentences provide the media is enough to stave off speculation during the summer break, while Checo rests up, Max rests up, and regroups for the remaining races, and the team can shut out the noise to allow them to essentially go, how in the Bernie Collins are we able to respond to McLaren and Mercedes at the moment? Because put simply, we can't do that. The RB20 upgrades that they brought have been enough to keep them where they are, but it's certainly not been enough for them to kick on like they did with their Hungarian upgrade last year. It's a very genuine concern, since McLaren have yet to roll out a second major upgrade package after their one in Miami. They've only brought in bits and bobs for either specific tracks, or just maybe a single component like a front wing, whereas Mercedes have been doing it in a more piecemeal type manner, with effective tweaks of the W15, proving to be quite reliable and effective. And most importantly, they are not pulling a Ferrari in getting overly enthusiastic and a little bit cocky in thinking, ooh, our upgrades are really good. Let's rush them in from Silverstone to Spain, and then, mamma mia, the porpoising is back! And now they're having to roll back all of their upgrades. They've lost months in development time. They are the major casualty in this year's development war because, put simply, there is one. McLaren have actually been holding off, staying the course with what they have, and Mercedes have been doing it carefully, going back to the days when they could develop a part and get it quickly on the car. And they're able to do it now without the issue of the cost cap. It's just such a shame that Mercedes overlooked the weight issue that cost George his Belgian victory via disqualification. And when considering both Verstappen's and Horner's statements, the situation is rather complicated for Red Bull. Even though Helmut Marko is obviously not pleased with the entire situation, and it's holding up the entire succession plan, which looked really close to being resolved, what with Arvid Lindblad coming in through F3, Isaac Haijar leading the F2 championship, there are plenty of candidates to be able to pass on the torch and carry on the succession plan. Liam Lawson, anybody? But it's all being held up by Perez being kept on, no one's quite sure what's going on with Daniel, and even though Helmut's been able to hold his tongue, relatively speaking, compared to 2023, you do occasionally get some barbs from the guy. This is going to cause a lot of tension and potentially flare up the peace that has been able to manifest itself between Horner and Marko. Max isn't bothered about Checo. He thinks he's doing the best that he can, it's not a priority, fix the car, that's the major issue. Then we can get back to giving Checo what he needs, or maybe needing to replace him. So essentially, we're getting a Hamilton-Bottas situation, this time with Verstappen and Perez. Perez isn't getting in the way, that's fine by Max. He can do all of this without him. But then you've got to look at the other factors surrounding Checo going to Red Bull in the first place, everything outside of the cockpit, and realise that Checo has been incredibly loyal to Christian Horner throughout the entire allegation storm of the beginning of the year, and thusly, he's been given the time he needs because, well, Horner is the boss, to do what he needs to do. There will come a time when Horner has to cut him off, but that's not during the summer break. And also, let's be real here, about 2021, even though it was a PR coup to get him and he was really, really talented, there's also the matter of money coming into play. Looking back on it, it was probably a major factor in securing Perez after facing certain doom after Racing Point dropped him despite the amazing performances over the years. Yes, Checo does have the skill and results to perfectly justify the move in hiring him over Albon. You don't come back from last place to win at Sakir without some ability in the car. But you really got to look back at what was going on in 2020 and the second half of 2019. Albon wasn't that terrible. He couldn't hold a candle in comparison to Max Verstappen, but Max isn't all that bothered by that. And Albon was improving. He got 2 podiums. I don't think he had enough non-Red Bull money attached to him because he does have a partnership with the drinks company, or at least he did back then, whereas Checo has about maybe nearly $30 million of sponsorship money going in from Carlos Slim, one of the richest people in Mexico or even the world. And that's been the case since Checo arrived in F1 when he went to Sauber. People were quick to dub him as a pay driver before they really saw what he could do in that car. But then the results came thick and fast, quite justifiably so, and the argument about him being a paid driver was quickly shoved off into the distance, and I believe that that was perfectly justified. May I remind you, Sergio Perez, on his day, is not a bad driver. He is one of the good ones. Force India made the most out of that driver, and we really got to see his full potential by getting so many podiums that were incredibly unlikely for that really small team when compared to the big guys, and we really should remember those times. On his day with that car, Sergio is incredible. And with him coming with a lot of sponsorship money, it didn't really matter because he brought the results for the car on the track and they got prize money as a team. But now, Sergio is not getting those results or not the results that are expected of him. So therefore, the argument of the paid driver thing is now starting to creep back into the foreground and becoming a factor in going, oh, they're only keeping him because he has a lot of money. He's not bringing in the results. And that is a shame. I don't want that to be the case, but again, the maths is mathing. It makes me think thusly. Are Red Bull giving up on the Constructors' title for this year to secure the extra wind tunnel time for 2025 and by proxy 2026? It's quite the shocking take, I know, because Christian Horner has been absolutely obsessed with winning the Constructors' title. To think of him potentially going, you know what, Checo's doing decent enough. Okay, if we don't win the Constructors this year, we'll get that back in the wind tunnel, and considering we had that punishment and we were able to do well anyway, this might actually benefit us. But he might be looking to Mercedes and what they've been able to do. With them being in second in the Constructors, having that little bit more wind tunnel time can make all the difference. And as we've seen, the W15 went from one of the worst cars Lewis had ever had at Mercedes since the first one he was at in 2013 to now one of the good ones. Not one of the best, but certainly a major recovery, which has now seen Lewis Hamilton become the only driver to have scored more than one Grand Prix victory this year. And also, there are clear issues with the car that the current design team are unable to quickly purge. And without Newey's beady eye on them anymore to steer them back in the right direction, even if it's just a friendly suggestion, that could prove to be costly. Yes, I know, you're going to be saying, oh, you're only saying that because he's British, but he has proven time and time again to be really useful, and even though he stepped back from full-time design after the wake of all of the bad reliability from Renault and becoming disillusioned and then becoming disillusioned again, what with the FIA constantly changing the rules to limit Red Bull's potential, he was still there, and he could easily provide some oversight and then go, that's good, go with it. Oh, I think you should change that. But now he's not there anymore. Vacher, at one time, was lauding Newey's presence in that capacity. He had the freedom to lead the team, but he also had Newey there as a friendly voice, patting him on the shoulder saying, that's good, roll with it. But now he's not there anymore. They're actually rolling back all of that and saying, oh, well, Adrian didn't do that much anyway, so he wasn't really useful. We did most of the work. And then Horner saying, oh, well, it was a real hassle trying to go around Adrian's workflow with using paper and a pencil. I mean, it was a real pain for all of the staff people, am I right? Yeah, yeah, no, he's really difficult. Please, no other team buy him. He's really good. And I don't think any team like Aston Martin or even McLaren, if EJ was correct, will care about that. They'll want the results. Is it worth allowing the competition to have their cake and eat it in 2024 whilst they're busy getting on top of the RB21 and 22 for the next couple of years? Possibly. Then again, this is a little bit of a tentative argument. In fact, you could probably reach to the foam of doubt for this one because I'm really not entirely certain, because Would Christian Horner really give up the chance to win the Constructors comfortably? Because after 2021, he does not want to go through any of that again. The stress of that season caused him to reach boiling point. It was one of the worst experiences in his life, as well as Toto's. Even though he won the thing, it was still completely arduous, and that could happen again if there is a genuine fight for the Constructors or even the driver's title. It could get nasty again. And based on the exchanges that we've had between Zach Brown, Toto Wolff and Christian so far, they're getting their gloves off. It's about to kick off if the prospect of either title could be valuable. Presently, McLaren only need a 1-2 finish and both Red Bulls to not score points or retire to take the lead. It's perfectly doable. In regards to the immediate threat of a world championship, Max is not worrying about that. It would take 2 retirements on his part to bring Lando Norris back into play. There is some wiggle room here. I believe that even if Lando wins every single race and Verstappen finishes right behind him in second, that still will not be enough for him to get the title, unless Lando is able to do even better in the sprints, but Max is pretty good at the sprints since he's won nearly all of them. There was the matter of the driver's market, and even though Carlos Sainz is no longer a cause for consideration since he's now signed on to Williams for the next few years, and even though he can drop out after 2026, that is not a major threat that Checo has to deal with. Now the threat is coming in from an internal level. There are still drivers that could spell doom for the Mexican. There was a lot of chatter from Daniel during the Belgian GP, and what that was about is only something we can guess. According to what I heard from one of the sources on the ground that I had, he was really friendly with Helmut Marko. There was a shaking of hands exchanged, and maybe some kind of deal was done. Whether or not it was for this year or next year, we don't know yet, and we might never know until the news actually comes out. So there is a lot of vagueness in the statement that Horner brought out. It's basically telling everyone, just shut up over the summer, we'll deal with it when we get back. It's sort of kicking the can down the road. They're giving him the opportunity to prove himself at circuits which he has potential to excel at based on his previous results. And well, the only track that leaps out to me immediately is the Azerbaijani Grand Prix. Baku is coming up, and Checo is a dab hand there. That's where he got the moniker, the Street King. He has been on the podium every single time that he's raced for Red Bull. He's won it twice, he's come second once, and that'll be the deciding factor going forward. If he can't do well there, and he either crashes out before Q3, or he doesn't get in the top 5, that would be a major alarm bell. Stability and continuity argument, that would be practically impossible to justify. What? Law? Surely not. You are seriously being that chaotically minded? You really think they would drop Checo before the Mexican Grand Prix? Do they value their lives at Red Bull? Well, no, I don't think they'll drop him after Baku, but it will certainly be a major thing going against him when it comes to negotiations at the end of the season. But it would take a Herculean effort from him if he didn't perform in Azerbaijan to be able to be retained for the final 4 races of the season after Mexico. And those performance clauses are still there, and they are still valid. The street circuit is Perez's best track, and the Red Bull car during the ground effect era has been able to carry him to the podium every single time he's been there. But the difference here is, though, is that Red Bull do not have the dominant advantage that they had in previous years, and also, at the beginning of every single year that they've been to Baku, it's been at the start of the year, when development has not really gotten off to the fullest of starts. Baku will be at the end of the European leg, there'll be more upgrades, cars will be developed, the Red Bull might be developed away from Checo to go to Max. That debate is as old as time, so long as they've been teammates, but it is something to be mindful about. And with Verstappen imploring his team to fix the RB20 for his own sake instead of looking for a replacement teammate, it's a thing counting against Checo, but I really hope this isn't something that will prevent him doing well there. As for next year, yeah, that's up for debate. Red Bull will want to come back fighting next year and really cap off this era of Formula 1, the ground effect era, the turbo hybrid era, with yet another championship and constructors. That's how they want to go off on a high, instead of falling off toward the last couple of seasons and then really setting the cat amongst the pigeons about who's going to do well for 2026. And that might mean another driver goes next to Max for next year. It's clear that Yuki's not going to figure it all now, which is a shame, much to my chagrin, making it a straight-up fight between Ricciardo and Lawson. And something's telling me that Ricciardo is preparing himself for not being selected for Red Bull, or not even being in Formula 1 altogether. There are quotes from him saying that, yeah, Spa might be my swan song, but, you know, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down swinging, I'm going to enjoy myself. He sort of accepted his fate, and there might be a chance for next year, but if it doesn't come, then it's okay. Daniel reckons that the people behind Red Bull will have done all the research possible to make their decision, and whatever they choose to do, that's okay with him. And even though Yuki's being punchy and he's saying if they pick Lawson over him, it would be weird, I do think that the argument is against him because he's not a full Red Bull Junior driver. He was part of their program for a while as part with Honda, but that might be going against him. But I really hope he does get a place on the track. He does deserve it as well. Does this mean that Lawson is a shoo-in for the top team and Hadjar gets the gig next to Tsunoda? Maybe, but it's hard to tell. But Checo is living on borrowed time. And even though the world has looked at this act of solidarity from Horner and gone, what? I reckon it's pretty straightforward when you step back and look at everything under the sun. Max isn't that bothered about Checo at the moment. He's quite happy with what he's doing because he's not getting in the way, although at Spa it did come close. He was holding him up for a couple more laps than he should have. But right now, he's not caring about that. He's not cared about Checo's plight for a long time. It's fine to pay lip service and go, oh, Checo's absolutely fine, no need to replace him, it doesn't really take any skin off his nose. Right now, he just wants to have the RB20 back to where it was at the beginning of the year. Plain and simple. He wants to race at the front. And right now, he's now trying to get anything higher than 5th. This is absolutely insane, the drop-off from Red Bull. And McLaren barely upgrading the car. Oh god, it's going to be even worse when they do. Well, worse for everyone else, not me, but I'm trying to be impartial here. And Perez's sponsorship monies and draw within his home territories, it's enough to ease the financial loss of not winning the Constructors this year, should that come about. Who knows, maybe Christian was right to put his faith in him, and Checo does bounce back even more so than he did at the end of last year, and then everything is fine, we'll go into 2025, and then everything will be hunky-dory again, and if Red Bull are off the pace, it won't matter as much, because, they'll be right hunting for points wherever they can. But if Checo did fall down next year, then I think they will get rid of him much faster. There are differences this time around than there were last year, and I really hope Red Bull don't live to regret this, because if Checo's dropped before 2024 is out, after this act of solidarity, it's going to be a PR disaster. And like I touched upon earlier, it's not like the team are low on options if they wanted to take a punt for next year. The younger generation of talent in the Red Bull Junior department are coming through, and that is something I discuss more in this video here that you can go and watch right now. Here come the boys!